I was homeless from 98 to 2004. I lived in the woods in several different areas in Washington state. I was a Boy Scout when I was younger, and my father showed me how to live off of the land. I was one of the only people I knew at the time that actually had a real camp. I wasn't one of those sleeping bag in the ditch at the side of the road people. I knew how to make a fire in the dead of winter when everything's covered in snow. I've seen strange things over the years, but one particular event stuck with me. It happened in 1999. The first incident occurred in June. I was camping in some woods about 2 miles out of town in Everett, Washington. I had two friends who also camped with me, Greg and Jim. Greg was into a lot of the same things that I liked, and we spoke all the time about paranormal and UFOs. Greg decides to walk to the grocery store to get some snacks that he missed when this happened. It's around 5 p.m. and me and Jim are just hanging out at a camp enjoying a beer. I was sitting in my tent and Jim was standing to the left of the tent. Jim spotted something and started pointing outside at the woods, saying there's something there in the clearing. I couldn't see it from where I was, but I can see roughly where he's pointing. In the clearing hovered what I can only describe as an illuminated diamond. It was shaped just like one that you'd see in a jewelry store or magazine. It pulsated colours that changed from red to yellow to fiery orange and made no sound. It had no visible propulsion. I saw no windows or landing gears. It doesn't look metallic. I would say it kind of looked like it was made out of glass, because I don't know how else to describe its appearance. It sat hovering over the ground about 30 feet in the air. Not long after I saw it and realised that it must have been something odd, 3 black unmarked helicopters actually flew over us. They come out of nowhere. They were flying side by side, one in the middle turning on some kind of light that was under the cockpit and started circling around the UFO. I would say they did this 4 or 5 times before turning around and flying back. Jim kept saying, "This can't be real, it's a UFO," over and over again. I think what he saw shattered his reality. The guy didn't believe in UFOs at all. He was the same kind of person who made fun of others who believed in that kind of thing. The object started to move slowly. It moves from right in a straight line, and then changes direction and moves to the left in a straight line. It did this, I think, maybe 3 times. It then vanishes in a golden streak of light. The temperature in the woods drops all of a sudden, and our teeth start chattering. Jim grabbed his pack and booked. Now, I stayed when Greg came back, and I told him what we saw, and he said, "Oh man, I wish I saw it." I stayed in that spot for a couple more days before deciding to move my camp further into the woods. For some reason, seeing that UFO didn't affect me the way it did Jim. He was hiding out somewhere and no one could find him. When you did run into the guy, he would make lame excuses as to why he didn't go. He did this to me and Greg several times until I never saw him again. Now flash forward to August. I was camping alone. Greg was living at his girlfriend's apartment. I'd basically just gotten back to my camp from walking down to town to get a shower and something to eat. I was wide awake. It was starting to get dark, but there was enough light to see through the trees. My camp sat near the edge of the woods next to a guy's house. The gentleman whose house it was owned a dog. I knew this because I cut through his backyard one night and the dog's barking at me. I was sitting in my tent with the front window unzipped, reading a book by a flashlight. I've always had a very good hearing. I could hear what sounded like somebody trying to creep up on my camp down a path. Now, I figured it's probably a neighbour's kid or something trying to spook me. I could then hear what sounded like fabric running together, like pant legs from somebody walking towards me. I really wasn't too sure what to make of this, so I wait for them silently as they move closer towards where I am. I guess my plan was to jump out of my tent and catch them in the act so they're scared and run off. That's not exactly what happened, to put it lightly. What I saw was the most frightening thing I've ever seen. I see the silhouette of a 10 to 12 foot tall thin being. It had a thin neck with a large bulbous head. There didn't appear to be any hair on its head. It hunched forward as it walks. Its arms were so long as its hands hung below where a normal person would have their knees. It walked in big strides. It made no noises as it moved. It went from the right side of my camp to the left, and I was freaked out. I remembered thinking, what the heck? I quickly jump out of my tent and start to shine my flashlight around, trying to spot this thing. It was nowhere to be seen. I guess I must have made it go into what they call fight or flight, because this thing knew I was ready to fight it off, I guess. But it simply disappeared. The woods were dead silent, no crickets. The neighbour's dog wasn't barking, which is weird. I knew I saw something, but it appeared to have gone and didn't come back. I go back into my tent and shrugged it off. I'm not sure why I did this, and I went back to reading my book. I couldn't concentrate on the words though. I become very tired suddenly, as if I'd been put under a sleeping spell. Now, I couldn't keep my eyes on this, no matter how hard I thought of it. I lay down and have my pocket knife next to me for protection. I say I'm gonna stay up and listen. I ended up passing out before not too long, and I hear what sounded like little people rushing towards my tent on all fours. I woke up the next morning feeling like I've had the best sleep ever. I can't explain it, but I moved my camp not too far after this, as I gave what happened to be more of a weird situation. I kind of realised that I was probably abducted. I don't have any memories of being taken or anything. It just makes more sense that way. The event frightened me so bad that for years I was afraid to be alone, especially at night. I locked all my doors and windows before going to bed. I didn't even like it when I'm in the shower on my own and have to close my eyes. I get this anticipation and feeling of dread, like I'm gonna be snatched when I'm not paying attention. I've had insomnia for years. I've gotten better now, but only ever get like 3 or so hours of sleep. Sometimes I hear what sounds like movements at night, and I just lay in bed listening. Nothing usually happens, but sometimes I think I see shadow people. I don't know what happened to me that night out in the woods, but the thing I saw, it wasn't human or animal. I'll never forget it. Now for some more information, it was about 8 years later that I had an encounter with 2 MIBs while taking 2 people through the woods. I was at the local homeless shelter talking to my friend Ryan about the being I saw in the woods. Then a guy who we don't know walked up and says, "Can he talk to us?" I said sure. He told us his name and that he was in the army out of Utah. We asked him why he was out in Washington, and he said, well, the army breached his contract, so he moved. Apparently, this guy and his brother were both enlisted and would take hikes up there, and they accidentally discovered the entrance of a base or something. They were immediately surrounded by rifles and stuff. They were taken into the base and interrogated. They were given some kind of injection or something that he thought was truth serum. His brother forgot about what happened, but somehow he retained his memory. He said when he got home into his local barracks, he resigned. When he started driving to Washington, he noticed that he's being followed apparently. He looks to the front plate to try and figure out the number, but it's fuzzy. It was like it was being blurred out. He then saw the driver stick an arm out of the window and he felt a thump on his van. Apparently it was a state officer, also there at the same time. He got out of the van, and they get out too. He said there it was seized, and he then traded the van with a compact one to continue on his way. He said he never saw the dark sedan or cop again. I asked him if he saw anything in the woods, but he said he didn't see anything. Now, we're basically going through the woods, and suddenly Ryan said stop and points behind us. Behind us at the intersection were 2 white males wearing black suits. They both had on black sunglasses, and the one on the right waves to us. We ran into the woods and cut through to the other side. We saw some kind of green beam that was pointing towards where we're standing. The guy from Utah said that he recognized it. Now we ran for miles to get away from them. I guess we got away because none of them actually saw where we were going. One night about 10 years ago, me and my best friend decided to go stop by a local hangout in ours in Bowie, MD, to smoke a cigarette before he dropped me off at home. We grew up here and spent our early years wandering the trail and the woods and whatnot, just drinking. So this one spot is on a railroad overpass at 450 and 197. There's a parking lot and a small area of grass with trees, about a 30 feet strip of land separating the track and the lot. So it's night time and we decide to go there to have a smoke. We go on the tracks and we're facing the parking lot, so the overpass is to our left and we got the tracks on our right. This way, we're still barely in the glow, but we got some light. Now we're smoking and he's talking, but the entire time I'm focused to my right, peering down this track because I have a weird feeling. I actually didn't figure out what it was until later, and it's a feeling of being watched by something. I've never had this. About 2 minutes in, we're almost done and a helicopter comes above us, seemingly at tree level, with the spotlight briefly going right over us and then the direction of the overpass. Not 5 seconds later, I hear the gravel shift from between the tracks and I look to the overpass. Standing there is the silhouette of this giant thing. Now since it's dark and it's under an overpass, I only see the silhouette, but it's 8 feet tall or 9, and kind of blurry looking. It appears like its head is attached to its torso, completely bypassing any semblance of a neck. Now, it was huge, and we only looked at it for a couple of seconds before I said, "Let's go now." We got out of there hurriedly, rushing away, and we hear the gravel move closer. Not 3 seconds later, we both hear the most demonic, horrifying, multiple pitch scream which is right above our heads. It came from no more than a foot behind us, so of course we book it to the car, and no, we didn't look back because it was terrifying. We get to the car, and weirdly, my mate has his lanyard stuck around the wheel, and we have to pull it off for a while before we can actually move. Anyway, we get driving around for only an hour before we can speak and say, "What was that?" Hey guys, I have another story for you all. This one is unexplained / an encounter and a bit of a long one. About 6 years ago, over the summer of my junior year, going into my senior year of high school, I experienced something that I can't quite shake off to this day. My parents and friends' parents were going out of town for the weekend, so myself and 3 others planned a sleepover so we can all hang out, be as loud as we want, etc. We slept over at my friend's house. His house is located on the east side of town where there's a small wooded area. Now that night, we all mentioned how that we could sleep on the trampoline. Apparently it's warm at night, and none of us have done it before. Now, the guy who owns here is actually a little bit concerned because apparently there's homeless people and sometimes deers wander out of nowhere. Basically, his house is in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by forests, and there's no fences separating us from the woods, so literally anything can just go into his yard, and vice versa. I told him that we're going to be fine and there's nothing to worry about, but boy did I wish I could go back on that statement. We started setting up our spots on the tramp, getting cozy and just hanging out, looking at our phones. About an hour into this, I start to hear twigs snapping and leaves crunching. Matt was the only one who wasn't on the trampoline, but sitting on a small river donut on the deck next to the tramp. I was looking at Matt while all of this was happening, and he was looking into the woods. He didn't say anything other than a quiet, "I told you this is a bad idea." I kept listening for a few minutes and then it stopped. My friends were all listening too. They didn't seem concerned. It was really quiet after it stopped and none of us said a thing. We all looked back on our phones and that's when we saw it. The second my eyes met my phone, I saw from my peripheral vision this 7 or 8 feet tall thing running out of the woods into the backyard and dart into the side of the home. We all saw the silhouette of whatever this thing was. It was almost ghostly. It was extremely slim and bipedal. Here's the weird thing though, we saw it run, but it made zero sound while doing so. But it made the motion as if somebody was running. When we saw this, we all did the exact same thing, screamed and ran off the trampoline. Matt was the first one inside. I'm surprised that he can even run, let alone walk, because of his injury. We left some blankets and pillows outside because we were in such a hurry. We shut the door and sliding door and lock it. All of the windows are also closed. We kept looking outside of the windows trying to find something, but there was nothing. Because we're so startled, we actually stayed up until sunrise. Now, I think about what happened on an almost daily basis. Everyone I've told the story to says that, well, maybe it was a skinwalker or something, but I'm really not sure. It's crazy to think of. Now this happened while I was driving in the woods years ago. It was a pretty familiar area. To this day I can actually go to the exact spot it happened. It was summer and I was driving a convertible, so the top was down. Maybe somewhere around 2 AM-ish. It was a very clear night, but it had stormed earlier. On the horizon on the right side of my car, I see the flashes of amber light in the distance. At first I thought it was an emergency vehicle, but I knew the area very well. There were no roads where the lights were coming from, nothing but woods for miles and miles. In fact, I crashed the car trying to figure out the lights almost. There was a tree down in the road that I almost hit from the storm earlier. I have to stop the car and turn around. It's a 2-lane road with lights nearby. But these eventually fade off. There's now nothing but starlights and my headlights. I turn the car around in the middle of the road with my headlights on. I guess whatever it was suddenly appears about 8 feet tall. At least that's my best guess as to what happened. Now, I stopped the car. Why I did so I can't tell you. I don't know, but I did. I shut off the lights, and this thing, definitely humanoid, not human, had some kind of luminescence about it. Its skin glowed a dull white light. The thing starts to move towards the car, making weird sounds and moans. It sounds very hoarse too. As it got closer, I could only make out its features. I couldn't believe what was happening. Again, it's very tall and thin. I remembered thinking that if it was human it would have starved to death long ago. Its arms were out of proportion, as was its neck. They were abnormally long. Its arms were nearly to its knees. It had wrinkled, worn, leathery looking skin, which was the purest white I've ever seen. The wrinkles of its skin made it look impossibly old. It folded over itself, and again, the best way I can describe it is like looking into some combination of maggot, birch bark, and wet newspaper. Like, if you cut your finger and wear a bandage way too long, then you take it off and the skin is all stickly and white and wrinkled, but that everywhere. The closer it got, the more I could see. Its eyes, or apparent lack thereof, they just looked like large, deep, dark holes. Its mouth was crooked and way too wide. If it had ears, the corners of the mouth would be right up to them. The moaning and limping and shuffling sounds were horrible. I then start my car and get out of there and probably drove about 90 all the way home. In hindsight, I regret leaving. I had the strong impression after the fact that the thing was actually sick or injured or dying. It didn't look well, but whatever it was, I think it only wanted help. Now, I was young at the time of this, but it was so strange I can still remember it so vividly. My family was looking at moving into another home, and we were looking at a house with a large backyard with woods behind it. My older sister and I had our own stuff and went to the back near the woods. I was looking in the woods when I saw a tall white, slow moving blur. I was looking directly at it, yet It was so blurry and unfocused that it was basically a formless blob. I look at my sister, and she told me that we had to run, so we actually ran all the way back to our home and to our parents. I've never been able to find anything similar online though, and I still don't know what this was. To get to the point, today around 5 p.m. on the west coast of Sweden, me and my dad went for a walk in a forest maybe 10 minutes from civilization without any lights. There's trails without street lights. Now, we saw the trail fairly clearly. We often take walks together and were talking about something mundane. We were right next to a lake and we noticed a big group of maybe 50 ducks just chilling in the water close to the beach. Then out of nowhere, maybe 50 feet in front of us, a creature ran across from the trail, right to left, then continues down, quickly disappearing out of sight. I'd say it was about 150 cm tall, on 4 legs, beige or brown colour, really fast, made no noise except for the sounds of running. All the ducks in the lake freak out and start flying and screaming, which feels like weird behaviour. I mean, they've seen deers go past and not flinch before, but why this? There's also a heavy smell of blood or iron permeating the air. Both of us can smell it. I've never experienced a smell like this before, and I work in a hospital, so I'm used to blood. Personally, I'm fascinated by these kinds of things, so I believe in different possibilities. My dad's a hardcore skeptic though, science loving. He grew up in a farm in the middle of Sweden's forests and is fairly familiar with Swedish wildlife. He said he's never seen anything like that before, or something that can move so fast. Now, we don't have many big mammals here too. The closest thing is really a deer, but it definitely wasn't that. So I don't know what it could have been. It's springtime in southern Utah or Colorado, near the Arches National Park around 1999. I was travelling with my family and I was about 6 years old. We'd been driving for a while after a full day of hiking. We arrived at a gas station with a picnic table on the left side of the building. We just bought bread, sliced meat and chips for dinner. The 7-Eleven special my family and father called it. After we ate, my parents went to chart our routes in the car. Me, my sister and brother sat at the table finishing our meals when a young Native American boy approaches. He's probably about 13 or so, but we can't really tell. It's dark and he seems to come out of nowhere. He greeted us and then says, "Can he sit with us?" We said, "Yeah, sure." That's when he said if we've heard of skinwalkers. The name itself is disconcerting. He describes them to us. They look like you and change shapes and are animals or people sometimes, but if you let them close, they'll get you. I was the youngest of the 3, so I was usually the butt of the joke, but I could see the fear in my brother's eyes and sisters, and that scared me. The boy then left and just seemed to disappear. We told our parents about this, and they say he's scaring us, but my father says it's a real myth, and that there are skinwalkers, but he's not sure. Apparently the Navajo were also tricksters, he said, and there were witches there and they would change form. Apparently they usually appear as animals or people, but it could be aliens. Now we did believe in aliens. It was spooky, but we moved on. This is where it gets weird. The next day as we were driving, there was a car stopped in front of us. They were stopped for a deer standing in the middle of the road. We all got out and just looked at the deer, just standing there. I pulled up my camera and took a photo, but I looked through the lens and nothing is there, just the road. I looked back. The deer's there, blinking and flapping its ears. I could hear its breath. But I looked through the camera and it was gone. Impossible, I thought. I'm an adult now and I'll never forget seeing that. A couple of years ago, I was in the woods in KY hiking and looking for some ginseng. I stopped to search the ground and saw a small stone rolling past me. I look up and saw another one land about 6 feet away. At first I'm thinking nothing of it, just curious to figure out what's going on. I move up on about 100 feet. Now, a small stone landslides beside me. I start looking around and then all of a sudden, it was just raining down small stones around me. By small I mean like pebbles. The hair on the back of my neck stood up and I get a terrible feeling like I'm in danger. Immediately I started heading down off the mountain while loads of rocks are falling around me. I keep thinking I'm seeing shadows or something moving quickly between the trees, but never actually saw whatever it was. I have to add that I was on my own private property and nobody's around for literally miles and miles. It's a very secluded area and none of the rocks actually hit me. This is the first time sharing this and I've never told anybody about it before. I had quite a number of odd encounters over the years, lots of which came from my time camping, as I was working towards Eagle Scout. I spent extensive amounts of time in national parks and in bushes solo. These are places I generally feel pretty comfortable in, with some of the experiences that I had creeped me out so much that it actually deters me from doing solo ventures. I'm still an avid outdoorsman, but I'm also very cautious. This particular event occurred in 2007 in the Gila Wilderness in the Gila National Park in New Mexico. Now I'm actually from New Mexico and was raised in Roswell, so this is an area that I visited several times prior without major incident. On this particular trip, I was with a group of about 10 or so other people. There were 2 days into our trek that several more actually went. For those who aren't familiar with Gila, it's a stunningly beautiful area with trails that follow a winding river that caverns beautifully through a canyon. There are high cliffs just on either side going up a few hundred feet through some parts of the canyon and also dense brush. Overall, it does actually feel very isolated and has an odd vibe to it in certain places. I've always associated that with the fact that it's in an area with ancient Native American history dating back to at least 9600 BC that I know of, or maybe further. Lots of crazy stuff happened there over the years. Sure, it's got a compelling history. Now on this particular night, we were camped in an area where the river makes a U-shape as it wraps through the canyon. It was a fun day, and I'd even managed to catch some trout that I ate for dinner. Right around dusk, I needed to relieve myself, so I wandered away from our camp into what I described as a ravine. It's an arroyo where floodwaters drain into the river. There was dense brush and high slopes on either side. All in all, it seems to be a good place to go at the time. I made my way up the ravine, and thinking back on it, I walked an unreasonable distance from the camp, which I find strange. If I kept walking, it was almost as though I was doing so being drawn in further, which isn't my norm. Kind of absent-mindedly. As a preface, there is something I think many here are familiar with, quaintly known as the silence. Typically such things occur when a large predator is in the area, and I know from reading other stories that a lot of people understand this. Anyway, about halfway through dropping into the wilderness, I noticed it's very quiet. I knew something was very wrong. When I say quiet, I mean the silence was deafening, if that makes sense. By this time, it's nearly completely dark. I'm out of earshot, and alarm bells are going off intensely. Now my hair stood on end. I noticed a strange change in my perception, likely caused by the twilight phase change, but the light around me seems to become shrouded in a shadow, and it's very weird. It just becomes quiet. It was like you would hear yourself breathe. Now, you know that feeling you get when you're sitting somewhere public and just feel someone staring at you? That happened so intensely, and a few moments later, I hear a loud and distinct crack sound, an odd rustling about 30 feet away. This is quite far above me and actually in the bush. It sounded like somebody walking where nobody should be. It sounded like human footsteps cracking twigs. I'm petrified to make a move. But I finished my business and stood as confidently as I can, mustering to be able to face the direction of the sound. I'm unarmed, knowing that there are predators. I didn't want to make myself appear vulnerable. No, not in the dark especially. Now I've encountered bears, mountain lions, but this felt so different. I didn't have the high ground. Now I say very loudly hello. A few seconds go by and the rustling continues, followed with silence. With no responses back for a few moments, at this point, I felt beyond vulnerable and terrified. Unreasonably terrified, actually. Now in hindsight, after researching, I often wondered what this could have been. With the hair standing on the back of my neck up now, I noticed eyes. About 20 feet above the bank of the ditch is a pair of eyes staring at me. I was in shock for a moment as it was near where I heard the crack. Now slightly iridescent looking eyes high above me on the bank. It was high enough that it would have easily been a massive creature, and the eyes were far enough apart that you knew for a fact that this was quite a big thing. So the silhouette doesn't make sense. Instinctively I begin to back up as slowly as I can as I watch those eyes. That's when I hear another crack above me to my right and I lose it. This noise is much louder. At this point, my fight or flight does go into overdrive and I run. Breathless, I made it back to my camp and told my friends that I thought there was a large predator there and that we have to move, or at least put things in a bear bag. It could have been a bear or mountain lion, but who knows? I seem to have been in similar situations before with animals, but this was a lot different from that, so I don't know what it could have been. I was on shift one night and everything was going relatively normally. In fact, I did something against the protocol of where I worked. I decided that I needed to go for a walk just to get out. This is on the week of which is leading up to Halloween, so a lot of the trees are dead around here, and I kind of dealt with a few people being idiots earlier in the week. You'd often find people trying to scare each other out here, and I don't know, there was something really creepy about seeing people out here sometimes. As a ranger, it's something that shouldn't necessarily come as a surprise to me, as basically our whole job is just to watch out for people and make sure we maintain the nature and the park. There was a few things on my mind in this moment. I was getting really tired of working. I wasn't able to stop working when I wanted to, and my work didn't let me use time off when I wanted to, and I think it was having a little bit of an effect on me. I mean, I was kind of doing everything and doing a pretty good job of sticking to the book and getting everything done. But you know, eventually it starts to tire you out a little bit. I realised too that if there was something on my mind, I would almost zone out completely and simply focus on that. Even if I was talking to somebody, I'd be looking them dead in the face and I'd just completely blank out to almost another place, which I think was pretty weird for me. But the show goes on, as the old saying goes, so I continue. As I'm walking, there was an absolutely beautiful brisk breeze this night and it made me feel really good. The trees are starting to look especially beautiful too, just because of the time of year. These didn't necessarily change colour too much, but there was something about having a mixture of ones with leaves on it and those without, or fern or whatever, that I found particularly attractive. The park lake where we were had a beautiful blue lake next to it. Now this meant that we had to be especially careful because sometimes people would go in the water, even at this time of the year when specifically they were instructed not to, they would still do it, and it become quite dangerous really, because all it takes is one wrong move and you can go in there for too long and not come out again. Hypothermia sets in a lot quicker than what people realise it does, so this is a specifically dangerous area, and I don't have a good feeling about being here for some reason. I can see that there's one small boat out there, but it's kind of drifting. I presume that somebody's left it there and forgotten about it, and it's just come off of the shoreline into the lake itself. I know for a fact that I'm absolutely not going to be able to get it right now. I don't want to take the boat out, and it's too dangerous because if I fall in, I'm really going to struggle to get myself back in time. I'd make a fire, yeah, but I don't want to set fire to the whole forest. One of our colleagues actually did this before, believe it or not. Rather than actually checking what they were doing was accurate and safe, they had in fact not done so whatsoever, and eventually ended up putting everybody's lives in danger here, which I think was a pretty crazy thing to do. We put out the fire quite quickly, but it could have easily spread into a huge one. It would have cost millions and millions of dollars for us to repair, but the toll on nature would have been far worse. So that wasn't necessarily my idea. I decided to call around to see if anybody else is there and try and figure out what everybody else is doing, but I don't get a reply, so I just assume that this might be empty. It might be my chance here. Now, I continue on and keep on getting more and more lost in my thoughts. It was kind of like a self-filling cycle where the more you do it, the worse it becomes, but it was really difficult for me to focus on anything else. I was actually quite annoyed. I just couldn't seem to get out of my head at all. It felt like I just had far too much work to do, and just people really making my life difficult. Also, there was some money I was owed on some online work I'd done, so I was pretty cheesed off about this. I mean, who isn't when they're owed money? So I continue onwards, and I can hear the breathing of animals around me. I don't know what animal that is, but I did realise that was a very strange thing to have. It's something that I haven't necessarily encountered. It sounded like there was maybe a dog breathing around me every so often, but it was weird. I thought maybe a dog got off or something, but God, I hated the idea of it. I love dogs and didn't want to know any were astray. I even stupidly start thinking maybe it's to do with the boat, and I keep trying to snap myself out of these weird spiraling thoughts, but I just can't seem to. It was like something took control of my mind. That's when I noticed something on the horizon. There are 3 plumes of smoke. I think, God, that's the last thing I want. The problem is, I'm on the opposite side of the lake at this point. Funnily enough, the boat seems to be drifting towards me. I know I promised to myself that I wasn't going to go out on it, but I just wasn't in the mood. I think I was just too tired, so I waited. From the looks of it, this isn't necessarily a dangerous fire. It's almost like somebody was putting up a smoke signal, which I think is really weird. Why would you be putting up a smoke signal here? This is not hundreds of years ago. We are well within the 20th century now, so what was happening? I do find it particularly odd though how that the boat is slowly drifting across to literally exactly where I am. I sarcastically say thank you when I realise it's not too far away. Now the boat itself actually looks quite old. It's like somebody's made this out of hand, maybe 10 years ago or so, where there's almost some kind of agent or patina as such on the wood. But it looks like nobody's ever been in it. I put my hand towards it and I stop. I have a feeling I shouldn't be doing this. God, what am I thinking? The boat could easily sink and then I'm in trouble. So I get up and continue now on the perimeter. The other problem now is I can't be gone from the station for too long because, really, I should be checking in with other people to let me know if there's anything that I need to do and how I am too. But I didn't. So, instead, I just keep walking quicker. Now, I'm getting closer to where the fire is, or at least the smoke, and I realise that it seems to have gone out, Out of the three plumes, I can only see two now. I get closer and there's only one, and eventually none at all. I'm certain there's people doing this now. I think they've seen me and put out their fires and went to hide off somewhere else, so I don't take too much notice now. Just continue walking down there. Now I get closer and closer, and then I find something especially strange. There seems to be no source of the smoke or fire whatsoever, which is pretty weird. I don't understand that. I was literally right next to it and now there seems to be nothing. I should at least have some signs of what this is, but I don't. I decide that we're gonna have to send out a search at some point, because this is really dangerous. I don't want to be the one sleeping there when there's a huge fire. So I decide to turn away. I look for the boat and I presume that it's drifted off somewhere further, as I start making my way around the other side again. I thought maybe some people had some time off over the Halloween holidays and just wanted to enjoy themselves out here. I call out, "Hey, no camping." When I lock eyes with something, there seems to be an owl or something up in the trees. It doesn't look right though. This looks like an absolutely huge one. I can make out the beak and where the eyes are supposed to be, and now I hear rattling. I quickly look around to see if there's any snakes or anything, but I don't see any. That's bizarre. It sounded like there was a rattlesnake right next to me. I'm actually terrified of the things. There shouldn't be any out here, but I quickly turn back. Not that I wasn't brave enough to investigate what was possibly going on here. I mean, I absolutely wasn't, but I don't want to get caught up in some kind of rubbish like that. So I get back. I've actually got bit by a snake before and had to go hospital, and it was not a fun experience or one that I'd like to do again in the future. I start to sweat a little bit too, and something feels off. As I'm walking, I can hear some kind of whistle sound. It sounds almost like a human whistling to try and retrieve an animal, but every so often. I don't know where it's coming from too. At one point it sounded like it was coming from right next to my head, and at other times it sounds like it's much further away. But the sound was definitely following me. I catch my thoughts spiraling once again into I'm gonna get murdered out here and some rubbish like that, so I manage to snap myself out of it. I walk a bit further, then take a few seconds to take in the beautiful scenery around me. It looks really nice and I find that this calms me down a lot. I start focusing on the little things that I'm gonna do when I get back home, and again, I feel better now. As I was walking back, I couldn't stop thinking about how much time I felt like I'd wasted. I just felt like it was stupid to go out here. I was angry now because I decided to walk but actually felt worse for it. But I don't have too much time to dwell on it, and I eventually make it back in. I then hand over for the shift in the following morning. I don't mention anything to them, but the weird part's when I get home. Now, as I said, we're in the run up to Halloween, so you're kind of used to seeing different people dressed up and stuff. So I don't think much of what I see next. As I'm driving, something walks out into the road. Now, I'm on quite a long forest road here. I'm effectively in the middle of nowhere specifically, but you do get the odd car or two. What I see is something walk out which is about 4.5 feet tall. It comes from the tree line, holds something up to me, then walks off, and I can see a smoke trail behind it. I then realise it's holding some kind of sage or something. Again, I think this is especially weird, but remind myself it's Halloween, so I don't think too much of it. I eventually get back home, unlock up and go inside my home. I didn't have my family there at the time, so it was a little bit lonelier than normal. That was fine. I'm used to these situations happening, but it wasn't necessarily fun. I grab a newspaper, I make myself a decaf coffee and sit down to drink it. On my porch, I get a really nice view into the woods. Now, as I'm sitting there drinking it, I have a strange smell. It's one that I haven't smelt for years and years, since I was about 14 doing my first job. The person who worked there had the little tiny incense things. I don't know what you call them, but the things on the stick you light. They smelled just like that. I actually go and check my toaster and everything just to make sure there's not a big fire which is about to engulf my house, so I'm not bothering to check. But there's nothing. I then light a candle to try and put out the smell. And I sit down going to read my newspaper and I start hearing the rattling sound once more. Okay, now this is quite scary. I'm actually worried myself and I'm sure I can hear breathing. I go and grab my knife. I didn't have a gun at this time. I didn't want to get into a melee battle with something, but I think there's someone on my property. Or a snake, which I'm also going to have to probably fight off. My hands are actually really sweaty. It's annoying because I have to keep wiping them trying to hold my knife, and I actually put it into the sleeve of my jumper. As I'm doing this, I notice someone walking past my house kind of staring in too. They looked especially weird. It's someone with a very long beard who kind of stops for a few seconds and keeps on walking. There was something about it I didn't like. He looks very old. He has quite dark skin. But as soon as he goes past, the rattling sound seems to stop. Now, I don't know what to make of this again. And I decide to call the police now. Something was really off about this situation and I couldn't necessarily put my finger on why it was all happening. So I wait for the cops to show up, which was late as anything. I'm actually tempted to call them to come back the following day because I can't be bothered, but eventually they arrive. I remembered looking at my watch and realising that the time had stopped on it, which is also bizarre. I just got this one. The cops come up and they're like, yeah, it's just, it's Halloween, man, it's just people playing around. I then go to explain what my profession is and the fact that I'm very used to dealing with weird situations like this, but they just kind of slide it off as in, oh no, don't worry man, just long hours, I get the same thing. I ended up inviting them in to have some coffee. It's just because I wanted some company really, but I do think this is especially strange. I say that no, something's wrong. I think someone's following me. And did you see the guy out here? He says no. He says that he's going to have a loop round before he gets back. We say our goodbyes and off he went. But I decide to look out the window. And what do you know? He does one turn to the right and goes off. Great, he hasn't done it. That doesn't mean I can't do it myself though. I have my flashlight. And I go outside holding the knife. I'm kind of holding it in a way where I'm seeing in front of myself I can kind of punch out with it. It's probably really not a good idea because I'm pretty stupid and clumsy with these things, but it felt like the right thing to do. Now I have a good look round, and I do notice there's something especially weird. I can hear my name being called from one other side of the forest. Of course it's on the side that has no lights and that I can't see into. It sounds like somebody very slowly saying Will. Will. At first I think maybe it's a wind, but I'm not sure. Then I think I hear somebody saying help me, and then my name. I think that I just need a good night's sleep. I shine my torch into the forest and I can't see anything. I turned it off for a little bit just to try and get a better view of things with my night eyes, but I can't see a thing. So I go back. I say, man, I've got to get out of this. I'll need a good night's sleep and a rest. Then I angrily check my emails, and once again they haven't approved my time off, which is getting ridiculous now. You'd think in a job like this they'd actually value you getting a good night's sleep and your well-being, but no, not at all. They absolutely do not care here, it turns out, but that's a battle for another time. So I call in for the night and wake up and start driving to my work for the next day. Now I'm driving on that road again and I stop for a little while. I look around, trying to see where the person could have come or went to, but again, I can't see anybody. I think once more that this is bizarre. There must have been somewhere that they went. There's no way that they could appear in the road like that, then just vanish, literally into nowhere. I know this is especially weird because why on earth would anybody be out here and just stop like that? Obviously they were trying to scare me, but why? That's the part that's bothering me. I get in my car again, turn on the engine, and for a fraction of a second, I can see something. It's sat in the backseat of my car staring at me. I turn around very quickly. Now this all literally happens in probably a few milliseconds, and it's gone. Whatever that thing is, it's almost just vanished as though it wasn't there. I just can't figure out what's going on. It was like somebody was sat in my car, but I wish I could give you more details, but I was so scared that I was hardly able to bring myself to look back. This all happened so quickly. I don't know what it is. I drive and shake my head, watching as my mile counter ticks over. I try and break it down and think, well, every mile that I go, I'm getting closer to my time off. But I didn't think it would have this kind of effect on me. Never had it before. As I'm driving too, I notice something else up ahead. I see more figures dressed in black. I slam on the brakes and my hands are shaky. They then turn and I realise that they're young children in Halloween outfits. And I snap myself out of it. I say, come on, get a grip, get a hold of yourself. You're a ranger, it's Halloween, just relax. I'm actually annoyed at how shaken up I become from this, and I start to become a bit more fearless. I mean, it was a beautiful time of year, actually one of my favourites to be honest. Now I make it back in, and I say hey to everyone. That's when one of them looks at me, and they appear almost white. I say, hey, what's wrong? He says, I heard something, man, last night. I say, what did you hear? He says, well, I heard somebody calling my name, and it sounded like you. I say, that's impossible, I was at home. He says, I know. I don't think the other guys are going to believe me on this one, but it's like you were injured out there trying to call out for help. I say that I heard something too, and so I thought I heard my name being called last night. I tell him I can't be sure because how quiet it was, but I definitely heard it. He then tells me, be careful out there, and slaps me on my shoulder and hands me some jade. I say, what's this? He said that it's from his family and it keeps you safe in times of danger. I say thank you and say that I'm going to return it to him as soon as I get the chance. So I turn back around and get ready for my shift. I'm not feeling good though at all. Now, I know something's way off here. But again, I've got my job to do, and it's not a fun one. I'm going to have to go around to where I did before. I then suddenly realised that I completely forgot to mention about the boat on the lake. I'm actually worried a bit because we do need to report these things and it could be a big danger for others. I'm not so afraid though when I realise that one of my colleagues is actually about to do the patrols with me. I calm down quite a lot and we both head out there. This is someone who's been doing the job for not too long, but they're very confident, which is probably what I needed. We start talking about all kinds of things and he says that his kids love Halloween and how they've been making pumpkin cakes and lattes. After not too long I actually completely forget about my fear and I'm feeling happy really. I was actually going to get some Halloween style cakes later on and I was excited for that. We actually live near a store where that you can get really good Halloween gear. And I always get something, even if it's just small, kind of like for a treat for myself. So I'm feeling okay now. As we head out though, I realise that my colleague keeps on looking over his shoulder. I say what's wrong and he says, nothing. I just keep thinking that I can see something. I ask him to elaborate, but he can never give me much details. He then says it's almost like somebody or something is just staring at me, but he can never explain exactly why or how. So I think, okay, that's weird, but I don't know. I can't explain it. So he says, don't worry man, let's just keep going, and his tone suddenly changes. I say, hey bud, what's that? He then says to me, what do you mean? I say, what's that up there? Is that another person? And I lock eyes with something very tall slowly going behind a tree. I can only describe it as kind of looking like a tall figure but with an animal's head. I can barely see it through the tree line. I didn't have my far sight glasses on at this point, but my buddy saw it too. He tells me to get back. He says, I don't know what that thing is, but we're not going up there. I agree. We think maybe somebody's put something up for Halloween, or jettisoned some gear for it, but it just seems so unlikely. And I'm tired of using it as an excuse to rationalise all these strange things happening. So we start walking back quickly. Now we're both quite worried at this point. Luckily he had some time in the military so he could keep up an insane pace. But it almost felt like no matter how far that we actually walked, we didn't necessarily make progress. I think it's kind of like, you know, when you have a terrible, terrible dream and your body doesn't work properly if there's danger. It's basically exactly like that. So all we can do now is just keep trying to progress at the best pace possible. Now it doesn't take too long before we get back, and we decide that we're not going to go out there for a while. Luckily we do have cameras covering quite a lot of this place. Unfortunately, as you can imagine, the cameras didn't actually cover the area that we went to. I mean, this place is huge and you couldn't expect it to, but it was annoying. But it was almost like this thing knew how to stay out of sight, whatever it is. So yeah, we're both pretty freaked out now, and I can't stop scanning the cameras. I actually scanned myself a couple of times where that I think my brain was trying to fill in the gaps or something, and nothing was there. But that's okay. I feel a lot safer doing it behind a screen. Now, as night falls, I'm unfortunately the good old guy that has to stay there. It's now leading closer and closer to Halloween though, so at least I have some scary movies to watch. I know that's not a good idea to be honest, and I don't actually know specifically why I decided to do that, but it's almost like a routine for me. So I now say goodbye to the other colleague as he goes home, back to the bunker and safety of his house. I'm here in this wooden building which probably wouldn't hold back anything, let alone a monster that might be out there. But I put on a Halloween film and I start to relax. I really like to watch some of the classics and I decide to watch Frankenstein. I feel pretty good and I actually have the song quite loud. I can in fact still hear the radio if I need to, so there's nothing to worry about. I do hear a knocking on the window though. I think, oh, they've come to relieve me. I get up and I can't see anyone there. I quickly have a scan round on the cameras and I notice I can't see any cars or anything, not to worry. I now begin to open the door, but I realise nobody's out here. I think maybe it's just on the TV, so I go and turn the volume down and just start laying there. I'm leaning back in my seat, just kind of thinking about my life now and everything related to it. And that's when I hear it again. This time it made me jump. Now I can't be certain about this next part because I was kind of in a daze, but I'm sure for a second I saw a face in the window. Impossible, I think. And ended up sleeping for a while. Now I don't actually tell anybody that I did this at work because you're really not supposed to. But I think I was just exhausted and drained from it all. I wake up at sunrise and to Halloween, and I feel alright about things. Now, I go and say goodbye to some of my colleagues who have now arrived. They say, did anything weird happen? And I say, no, it's pretty cool. Just the usual. I'm not actually sure why I did this. It probably would have been a good idea for me to tell them that, yeah, there's something crazy going on out there. You've got to really watch yourselves, but I didn't. So I decide just to go back home. I get in my car and I feel pretty good. I drive to a gas station which has a cafe, and I go to get a pumpkin spice latte, which again is something I love to have during Halloween times. There's all kinds of trick-or-treaters out too. They do it quite early in my state, so I think this is really cool. I don't know why, there's almost like a magic to it for me. I'm feeling pretty good, but very sleep deprived. I'm also a bit annoyed because I probably threw off my entire sleeping pattern now from doing that. But it's okay. So I eventually get back home. My brother's actually here now with his partner, which is pretty cool. They actually live quite a far away from here, but they pass through when they're going to college. And it's always nice to say hey to them and see how they're doing with their lives. So I'm here for a little bit with them, and we decide to continue. Now we keep on watching some scary films, and we go out together for a walk. We go quite a long way and actually come to some of the other houses. You can see all kinds of different people doing trick-or-treating and whatnot. And eventually we decide to head back. My brother says, oh god, well, do you see that costume? It was one really good one. They look like they might be older on stilts or something, but someone had something really tall dressed up. I say, what do you mean? He says, don't know man, it kind of, they went into the woods, but it looked cool. I didn't ask much more about it. The tone of my brother's voice wasn't a need to raise any kind of fear at the time, so I don't. But I start to feel sick though. Now it's kind of like the feeling as if you got some kind of like unclean surfaces around you, and you kind of have like the lump in your throat, like you're struggling to hold things down. So we eventually get back now, and life's pretty good. We're happily watching things, and I ended up falling asleep on the chair, and my brother and his girlfriend go to the spare room. I'm awoken in the night by something knocking on the door. I grab my bowl of candy and say hey, very deliriously, opening the door. I wait for a few seconds and wipe my eyes. I expected to feel the weight drop from the candy bowl as some happy trick-or-treaters fill their eyes with the candy and later their stomachs. But this doesn't happen. I look around again, and I think this is weird. There's no one here. Maybe I've imagined it. So I close the door behind me, turn around and go to sit down. After doing so, it happens again, this time loud enough to actually make me jump. I quickly get up now, and decide that I need to investigate this. There was definitely something off with the way that this happened. It was too loud and hostile to be anything normal. I start to think, well, maybe it's my brother. I go to look where they're staying, but I can't see anyone. So I know that that's bizarre. As I get up, I then see my brother crouching down looking out a window. What's wrong, man? He says, did you hear that? I say, what? I swear I just heard my girlfriend and her name calling out from the woods. I even believed it myself. He said he got up to go to the bathroom when he heard it. He can hear this from the open, but he can't figure out exactly where it's coming from. He said he went to check, and that's when he realised she's asleep, so he knows that something is definitely wrong here. And that's when his fear sets in. I say, what next? He says, well, I saw you, idiot. And then I think, this is really weird. I then say, did you hear the knocking? And he says no. How he didn't hear the knocking, I'll never know, because it felt like it could have shook the house down. We decide that it's the best time that we investigate. Now my brother says that he's going to check around out the windows, and I say that, yeah, I'm going to go outside. I don't know why I actually agreed to this because it meant my brother was in the safety of the house and I just went outside, but I guess it's my house and I know the area well, so I head outside to see what I could. I've got my flashlight on and some warm clothes now. I was actually so tired that I didn't think to bring a weapon, which I regretted. I thought I could probably turn off the torch and quickly hit someone on the head, but thinking of it now, that probably wouldn't have worked, but it helped me anyway. So I turn off the torch a few times to try and let my night eyes set in and not give away my position when I see something. Up ahead, I see the silhouette of something standing there. This thing is very tall and slender. Now, I only saw this for about 2 seconds as I turned and screamed, running in the opposite direction. I look over my shoulder and I can see it walking slowly towards me with a limp. I scream my brother's name and say, "Help, what the hell's that?" I run in and slam the door. My brother starts screaming too, and subsequently his girlfriend as he spots it. Now we quickly lock all of the doors and windows, and I go and get some knives and give one to my brother. We think maybe it's possibly a trick-or-treater, but we realise quickly it's not, as it slowly goes towards the forest. This thing almost walks like it's on stilts or stick legs or something. It's like it was made out of dark drapes or something. It slowly goes towards the tree line. He says, that's it. I say, what, tell me, thinking he knows and he's going to have a rational explanation. He says, the thing, that's where it come from, the voice. My girlfriend. We then looked at each other really confused, and we stare and waited. 1 minute passes, then 2 minutes, then 3 minutes, then 4. And we realise that, well, we probably should have checked the other side. And now I look on the other side of the window. Furthermore, I'm terribly paranoid now. What was that thing? I just don't know. I actually have so much energy now that I don't feel tired whatsoever. I actually went to make my brother some coffee so that way we can actually stay awake and figure out what on earth is happening. After a little bit of time, we realise that we're not necessarily in danger now, and that's a nice feeling. But it doesn't last for too long. We eventually decide that we need to go back and figure out what this thing is. So as soon as day breaks, we head out. Now we're not really able to see anything though. We have a look, eventually bravely going towards the tree line where we saw this thing, but there's nothing there. So that's actually really annoying. I wanted an explanation for this. Actually, all we saw was some trick-or-treaters getting it in the next day, which I thought was quite funny, but none of them actually come here. Now, me and my brother racked our brains for probably the next 2 or 3 hours trying to figure out what we've just seen, but neither of us are able to come up with any kind of logical or rational explanation as to what it could have possibly been. Whatever this is seems to go against everything normal or that we're aware of, but I don't like that it called out my brother's name and that I was hearing this before. Now I have the rest of the day off and my brother and his girlfriend offered me to go with them, but I say sorry, I can't, I've got my work soon. And dishearteningly, I decide that I have to just go in to work. I really don't want to. I would have paid $5,000 to not have to go in that day. It really felt like it. I actually didn't have that much saved, but I would have given it, honestly, or whatever I had in my bank account then. I get into work and I'm met by police there, which is very weird. I get a feeling in my stomach thinking, oh no, we've probably found a body or something, and I get a little paranoid. I then go and ask what happened, and one of my colleagues come and say, hey, did you hear what happened to Bill? I say, no, what happened? Oh god, how is he? He says, no, he's fine. He just broke his leg. I say, what do you mean? And he tells me that when he was on the night shift there, he heard somebody calling his name. He said that he couldn't figure out exactly who it was, but it kept saying that I need help up here. He said he followed it and followed it, but he was so caught up in this that he didn't actually take a second to look at his surroundings, and eventually he made it over a ridgeline and felt something sharp in his back. I say, what? He says it felt like something stabbed him. He then feels a force push him down, and he falls a long way. He fell from his radio too, so we didn't know any of this was going on. I say, God, is he definitely alive? They say, yeah. And they eventually find him out there and hear him whimpering. When they found him, he's fractured his leg, and he's got all kinds of cuts, but 3 very distinct gashes in his back, which he had to stop bleeding. Eventually they're able to get the medics out there to support him and take him away, and now he's being treated for it at the local hospital. I say I can't do this, and I actually give in my working notice right then and there. They say they understand. They didn't ask me for any more details. I was able to leave, and it was just due to psychological shock is what they had on paper. I remember driving back to my home and not knowing what to make of all of this. I decided that the safest thing that I can do now is move back to my parents' house. Well, I actually ended up going to my grandma's, but I did that for 6 months before moving. Even when the house was for sale, I refused to live there. Even to this day, it still really gives me nightmares. Every Halloween it comes straight back to the front of my mind.